The most dangerous enemy is not the one who declares war openly, but the one who sits at your table, shares your bread, and knows your weaknesses. In the intricate dance of human relationships, where loyalty and betrayal intertwine like lovers in the dark, the ability to identify those who wear friendship as a mask while harboring malevolent intentions becomes not just advantageous but essential for survival. This document explores the shadowy realm of human deception, where the principles of Niccolò Machiavelli's strategic thinking meet the harsh realities of modern interpersonal warfare. The strategies contained herein are not for the faint of heart, nor for those who prefer the comfort of naive trust. They are tools forged in the understanding that in the game of power and influence, the most devastating attacks come from those closest to us. Consider the story of Marcus, a rising executive in a multinational corporation. For 3 years, he had worked alongside David, a colleague who seemed to embody everything one could want in a professional relationship. David was supportive during Marcus's difficult projects, celebratory during his successes, and appeared genuinely invested in Marcus's career advancement. They shared lunches, confided in each other about workplace frustrations, and even socialized outside the office with their respective families. The revelation came not through dramatic confrontation, but through an accidentally forwarded email chain. Marcus discovered that David had been systematically undermining his projects by providing confidential information to competing departments, spreading subtle doubts about Marcus's competence to senior management, and positioning himself as the logical replacement for Marcus's role. The betrayal was not born of sudden opportunity, but was a carefully orchestrated campaign spanning months, if not years. This narrative illustrates a fundamental truth about human nature that Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The capacity for deception is not an aberration, but an inherent part of the human condition. Those who fail to recognize this reality do so at their own peril. The strategies that follow are not about becoming paranoid or cynical, but about developing the intellectual and emotional tools necessary to navigate a world where masks are common and authenticity is rare. The first principle of identifying hidden enemies is understanding that genuine friendship and calculated manipulation often wear identical faces in their early stages. The difference lies not in the immediate actions, but in the underlying motivations and long-term patterns that emerge when one knows how to observe them. A true friend seeks mutual benefit and genuine connection. A hidden enemy seeks advantage, information, or position, using the facade of friendship as a vehicle for their true objectives. The observation process begins with what we might call the asymmetry detection method. In genuine relationships, there exists a natural flow of give and take where both parties contribute to and benefit from the connection. Hidden enemies, however, create subtle asymmetries. They may be exceptionally interested in your vulnerabilities while revealing little of their own. They might consistently steer conversations toward topics that serve their information-gathering needs while showing limited genuine interest in subjects that matter to you but offer them no advantage. Sarah, a successful entrepreneur, learned this lesson when she noticed that her business partner, Jennifer, had an unusual pattern of questioning. During their regular meetings, Jennifer would probe extensively about Sarah's strategic plans, financial concerns, and client relationships, but would deflect or provide vague responses when Sarah asked similar questions about Jennifer's areas of responsibility. What initially seemed like Jennifer being a good listener eventually revealed itself as a systematic intelligence-gathering operation. Jennifer was preparing to launch a competing venture and was using their partnership as a means to understand and ultimately replicate Sarah's business model. The second principle involves understanding the concept of strategic empathy. Hidden enemies often display a form of empathy that feels almost too perfect, too attuned to your emotional needs. This is not the messy, sometimes awkward empathy of genuine friendship, but a calculated emotional response designed to create dependency and extract information. They seem to understand your feelings with uncanny accuracy, not because they truly care, but because they have studied you as a subject of strategic interest. This strategic empathy manifests in several recognizable patterns. The hidden enemy often remembers details about your life that seem impressive until you realize they only remember information that could be strategically useful. They may forget your birthday but remember exactly which clients you're having trouble with. They might not recall your spouse's name but have perfect recollection of your financial concerns or professional insecurities. The timing of their emotional support also reveals their true nature. Genuine friends offer support based on your needs. Hidden enemies offer support based on their opportunities. They appear most caring and attentive when you're vulnerable, not necessarily because they want to help, but because vulnerability represents an opportunity for influence and information extraction. Thomas experienced this with his longtime friend Richard during a particularly difficult divorce. Richard seemed extraordinarily supportive, always available to listen, offering advice and providing emotional comfort. However, Thomas eventually realized that Richard's support came with subtle probing questions about Thomas's financial situation, custody arrangements, and legal strategy. Richard wasn't offering comfort, he was gathering intelligence for Thomas's ex-wife, with whom Richard had secretly developed a financial relationship that benefited from the insider information. The third principle of identification involves recognizing what Machiavelli would call the cultivation of dependence. Hidden enemies don't simply gather information, they work to make themselves indispensable while simultaneously undermining your confidence in your own judgment and your relationships with others. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of their strategy because it feels like genuine care and support. They achieve this through a process of graduated dependency creation. Initially, they offer help with small matters, demonstrating their reliability and competence. Gradually, they position themselves as the primary source of advice, support, or assistance in increasingly important areas of your life. Simultaneously, they plant subtle seeds of doubt about other people in your network. Not through direct criticism, but through concerned observations and gentle suggestions that others might not have your best interests at heart. The hidden enemy becomes your primary confidant not through natural relationship development, but through the systematic elimination of alternative sources of trust and support. They don't compete with your other relationships directly. They poison them slowly, creating situations where you increasingly rely on them as your only truly trustworthy ally. Maria discovered this pattern with her business mentor, Patricia, who had initially seemed like a godsend. Patricia offered valuable advice, made important introductions, and appeared genuinely invested in Maria's success. However, over time, Maria noticed that Patricia would subtly question the motives of other people in Maria's network. A potential investor was probably just looking for a quick flip. A prospective business partner had concerning gaps in their track record. Other mentors were well-meaning but perhaps not experienced enough for your level of ambition. But the cumulative effect was to isolate Maria from other sources of guidance and opportunity, making her increasingly dependent on Patricia's counsel. When Maria eventually discovered that Patricia had been directing the best opportunities toward her own network while steering Maria away from connections that might threaten Patricia's influence, the pattern of manipulation became clear. The fourth principle involves understanding the strategic revelation pattern. Hidden enemies don't simply hide their true nature, they carefully manage the revelation of information about themselves to create specific impressions and reactions. They understand that trust is often built through the sharing of secrets and vulnerabilities, so they strategically reveal carefully chosen pieces of personal information designed to create the illusion of intimacy and mutual trust. These revelations follow a specific pattern. The information shared is usually impressive or sympathetic, designed to enhance their status or create emotional connection, but it's rarely information that actually makes them vulnerable or could be used against them. A hidden enemy might share stories of past struggles that make them seem relatable and humble, or past successes that establish their credibility, but they won't share information that reveals current weaknesses or could compromise their strategic position. The hidden enemy might tell you about a previous betrayal they experienced, which serves multiple purposes. It makes them seem like someone who understands loyalty. It positions them as having learned from experience, and it provides a framework for them to identify warning signs in your other relationships that coincidentally point toward the people they want you to distrust. James learned this lesson with his investment advisor Michael, who seemed refreshingly honest about his past mistakes and business failures. Michael would share stories about partnerships that had gone wrong, investments that had failed, and lessons learned through hard experience. These stories created a sense of trustworthiness and demonstrated humility that made James comfortable in trusting Michael with increasingly significant financial decisions. The revelation of Michael's true nature came when James discovered that the failures Michael had shared were actually other people's failures that Michael had reframed to serve his narrative. The partnerships that had gone wrong were partnerships that Michael had deliberately sabotaged. The investment failures were other people's losses that Michael had positioned as his own learning experiences. Michael had created an entirely fictional personal history designed to elicit trust while concealing his actual track record of manipulation and betrayal. The fifth principle concerns the identification of beneficial crisis patterns. Hidden enemies don't simply wait for opportunities to arise. They often create or exacerbate crises that allow them to position themselves as solutions. This is one of their most powerful strategies because it transforms them from potential threats into apparent saviors, making their true nature almost impossible to detect using conventional trust-building measures. The pattern typically involves the hidden enemy having advanced knowledge of problems, unusual insight into solutions, or surprising resources that become available just when you need them most. While genuine friends might sometimes be well-positioned to help during difficulties, hidden enemies display an almost uncanny ability to anticipate your needs and provide assistance that seems perfectly tailored to your situation. This assistance often comes with subtle strings attached, not immediately apparent obligations that only become clear later. The help provided might solve an immediate problem while creating longer-term dependencies or obligations that serve the hidden enemy's ultimate objectives. The crisis becomes a vehicle for the hidden enemy to become more deeply embedded in your life or business, gaining access to information, relationships, or resources that serve their broader strategic goals. David, a small business owner, experienced this with his accountant Laura, who seemed to have a remarkable ability to identify potential problems before they became serious and offer solutions that saved David significant money and legal complications. Laura would alert David to regulatory changes that could affect his business, identify potential tax issues before they became problems, and connect him with service providers who offered better terms than his current vendors. David was grateful for Laura's proactive approach and comprehensive service until he discovered that Laura had relationships with the regulatory officials who were creating the potential problems she was solving. The tax issues she identified were often the result of advice she had given that created the problems in the first place. The service providers she recommended were paying her commissions that significantly exceeded the savings she was generating for David. Laura had created an entire ecosystem of manufactured problems and monetized solutions. Understanding these patterns requires developing what might be called strategic skepticism, not a general distrust of all human relationships, but a systematic approach to evaluating the motivations and patterns behind the behaviors we observe. This involves asking difficult questions about the timing, consistency, and ultimate beneficiaries of the actions taken by those in our inner circles. The strategic skeptic looks for incongruities between stated motivations and actual behaviors, between public presentations and private actions, between the resources someone claims to have and their ability to deliver on promises. They pay attention to who benefits from advice given, who gains access to information through conversations, and who is positioned to take advantage of opportunities that arise from their counsel. The architecture of deception. The identification of hidden enemies requires understanding the sophisticated psychological and social architectures they employ to maintain their facades while pursuing their true objectives. These individuals are not merely opportunistic. They are strategic architects who construct elaborate systems of misdirection, emotional manipulation, and social positioning that can persist for years without detection. The foundation of their architecture rests on what we might term identity fragmentation, Unlike genuine individuals who maintain relatively consistent personalities across different contexts, hidden enemies construct multiple identity presentations that they deploy strategically depending on their audience and objectives. They become chameleons of character, adapting their personality, values, and interests to match what they believe will be most effective with each person in their network. Rebecca, a successful attorney, encountered this phenomenon with her law partner, Stephen, who seemed to embody different personalities depending on whom he was addressing. With Rebecca, he presented himself as a collaborative, ethically minded lawyer who valued work-life balance and fair compensation. With their senior partners, he adopted a more aggressive, profit-focused persona that emphasized billable hours and client acquisition. With younger associates, he appeared as a mentor figure who understood their struggles and advocated for their interests. Each of these personas was carefully crafted to achieve specific objectives. The collaborative persona with Rebecca was designed to extract information about her cases and client relationships. The aggressive persona with senior partners was calculated to advance his standing and gain access to higher-level strategic information. The mentor persona with junior staff was intended to build a network of loyalty and information sources who would report back to him about firm dynamics and opportunities. The sophistication of Stephen's identity management only became apparent when Rebecca realized that the same conversations were being described differently to different people. A client meeting that Stephen described to Rebecca as challenging but productive was characterized to the senior partners as requiring significant additional resources that Rebecca's approach couldn't adequately address. The same interaction was presented to junior associates as an example of how different, strategic approaches could yield different results, with subtle implications about the superiority of Stephen's methodology. This identity fragmentation is supported by what might be called selective memory deployment. Hidden enemies develop extraordinary abilities to remember and forget information strategically. They can recall minute details of conversations when those details serve their purposes while developing convenient amnesia about commitments, promises, or information that might constrain their actions or expose their contradictions. This selective memory operates on multiple levels. At the tactical level, they remember information that can be used for leverage, influence, or strategic advantage while forgetting information that would obligate them to reciprocal vulnerability or constraint. At the strategic level, they maintain different versions of shared experiences that can be deployed depending on what serves their current objectives. The hidden enemy might remember your confession about a professional insecurity but forget their promise to introduce you to a potential client. They recall your concerns about a mutual colleague but forget their own similar concerns when it becomes advantageous to align with that colleague. They have perfect recollection of information that allows them to position themselves as uniquely understanding your situation, but selective memory about information that would reveal their own manipulative behaviors. Margaret experienced this with her business coach, Robert, who demonstrated an uncanny ability to remember personal details about her family, her fears about business expansion, and her frustrations with employees, but consistently forgot practical commitments he had made. He would remember that Margaret was concerned about her daughter's college expenses, but forget that he had promised to introduce her to a client who needed exactly the services Margaret provided. He recalled Margaret's anxiety about a potential lawsuit, but forgot that he had agreed to connect her with an attorney who specialized in her industry. The pattern became clear when Margaret realized that Robert's memory was perfect for information that made her feel understood and vulnerable, but failed completely when it came to actions that would actually benefit her business. His selective memory served to maintain emotional dependency while avoiding practical obligations that would demonstrate his value through tangible results rather than emotional manipulation. The second architectural element involves what we might call triangulation methodology. Hidden enemies rarely attack or manipulate their targets directly. Instead, they create complex networks of influence that allow them to achieve their objectives while maintaining plausible deniability and preserving their carefully constructed image. Triangulation operates by using third parties to deliver negative messages, create conflicts, or apply pressure, while the hidden enemy maintains their position as a neutral observer or even a sympathetic ally. They become master orchestrators of interpersonal drama, creating situations where others do the dirty work while they remain positioned as peacemakers or objective advisors. The sophistication of this approach lies in its ability to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The hidden enemy can damage their target's relationships, gather information about various parties' loyalties and weaknesses, and enhance their own position as someone who stays above the fray while actually being the primary instigator of the conflicts they appear to be helping to resolve. Jonathan discovered this pattern with his department head Linda, who seemed remarkably skilled at maintaining harmony within their team despite the presence of several challenging personalities. Linda appeared to be an excellent manager who could mediate conflicts, address performance issues, and maintain team cohesion while advancing departmental objectives. The reality was far more complex. Linda was systematically creating conflicts between team members by sharing carefully edited versions of private conversations. She would tell Jonathan that Sarah had expressed concerns about his project management style, then tell Sarah that Jonathan felt her analytical approach was slowing down the team's progress. Each piece of information was technically accurate but presented in a way that created tension and mistrust between team members. Linda would then position herself as the solution to the conflicts she had created. She would offer to mediate between Jonathan and Sarah, providing advice to each about how to better work with the other, while gathering additional information about their perspectives, working styles, and professional vulnerabilities. The mediation sessions served multiple purposes. They enhanced Linda's reputation as a skilled manager, provided her with detailed intelligence about each team member's thinking, and created dependencies where team members relied on her to maintain functional working relationships. The triangulation methodology extends beyond simple conflict creation to include what might be termed alliance manipulation. Hidden enemies become skilled at creating temporary alliances that serve specific objectives while maintaining the flexibility to abandon or betray those alliances when circumstances change. They understand that loyalty is often a limited resource, and that people's allegiances can be shifted through careful manipulation of incentives, information, and opportunities. This alliance manipulation involves identifying the specific needs, fears, and ambitions of each person in their network and crafting approaches that appeal to those individual motivations while advancing the hidden enemy's broader objectives. They become expert at making each person feel like they have a special relationship while actually managing a portfolio of relationships that can be activated, modified, or terminated based on strategic considerations. The hidden enemy might simultaneously cultivate relationships with competing factions within an organization, providing different value propositions to each while gathering intelligence about all parties' strategies and weaknesses. They position themselves as valuable allies to multiple sides while maintaining the option to support whichever side ultimately serves their interests best. Thomas experienced this in his consulting firm with a colleague named Patricia, who seemed to have remarkably good relationships with everyone in the organization. Patricia appeared to bridge traditional divides between different practice areas, age groups, and professional philosophies in ways that enhanced collaboration and business development. The truth was that Patricia was running sophisticated intelligence operations across multiple organizational factions. She had convinced the senior partners that she could provide insights into the junior staff's concerns and ambitions. She had persuaded the junior staff that she could influence senior-level decision-making on their behalf. She had positioned herself with the business development team as having unique insights into client relationship management, while convincing the service delivery teams that she understood operational constraints. Each group believed they had privileged access to Patricia's insights and influence, but Patricia was actually arbitraging information and influence across all groups while building a comprehensive understanding of the organization's power dynamics, strategic priorities, and individual vulnerabilities. When a significant reorganization opportunity arose, Patricia was uniquely positioned to advance her own interests because she had better intelligence about all parties' positions and motivations than anyone else in the organization. The third architectural element involves strategic vulnerability creation. Hidden enemies don't simply exploit existing vulnerabilities, they actively work to create new vulnerabilities while positioning themselves as the primary source of protection or solution. This represents perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of their methodology because it transforms them from potential threats into apparent necessities. The process begins with subtle actions that create dependencies or expose new areas of risk while maintaining plausible deniability about the hidden enemy's role in creating these vulnerabilities. They might introduce new complexities into existing processes, suggest strategies that create new obligations or exposures, or facilitate connections that ultimately compromise their target's independence or security. The creation of strategic vulnerabilities is often accomplished through seemingly helpful suggestions or opportunities. The hidden enemy might recommend a business strategy that creates new competitive exposures, suggest a personal relationship that creates emotional dependencies, or propose a financial arrangement that creates new obligations or constraints. Each suggestion appears beneficial in isolation but serves to increase the target's reliance on the hidden enemy's ongoing assistance and insight. The vulnerability creation is accompanied by positioning themselves as uniquely qualified to manage or mitigate the risks they have helped to create. They become indispensable not because they provide unique value, but because they have engineered situations where their absence would create significant problems or exposures. Michael discovered this pattern with his investment advisor Richard, who had helped Michael restructure his portfolio in ways that initially seemed quite beneficial. Richard had identified several underperforming investments and recommended replacements that generated better returns. He had suggested diversification strategies that reduced Michael's exposure to sector-specific risks. He had introduced Michael to tax optimization strategies that significantly reduced his annual tax burden. Each of these improvements, however, came with increased complexity that made Michael more dependent on Richard's ongoing management and oversight. The new investments required more sophisticated monitoring and analysis. The diversification strategies involved financial instruments that Michael didn't fully understand. The tax optimization approaches created compliance requirements that demanded professional management to avoid significant penalties. Richard had systematically transformed Michael's relatively simple investment portfolio into a complex financial ecosystem that generated better returns but required expert management to avoid serious problems. Michael had gained financial performance but lost independence, creating a situation where ending the relationship with Richard would expose Michael to risks and complexities he was no longer equipped to manage independently. The sophistication of this approach lies in its creation of what might be called beneficial captivity. Michael was better off financially than he had been before the relationship, but he was also more vulnerable to manipulation and less capable of independent decision-making. Richard had improved Michael's situation while simultaneously making himself indispensable, creating a form of dependency that was difficult to recognize and even more difficult to escape. Understanding these architectural elements requires developing systematic approaches to relationship analysis that go beyond surface behaviors to examine underlying patterns, motivations, and structural dynamics. The effective identification of hidden enemies involves looking for the systematic creation of dependencies, the strategic management of information and relationships, and the careful construction of beneficial but constraining obligations. The key insight is that hidden enemies are not simply opportunistic individuals who take advantage of existing weaknesses. They are strategic architects who construct elaborate systems designed to serve their interests while maintaining the appearance of mutual benefit. Their sophistication lies not in their ability to lie or manipulate, but in their ability to create structural realities that serve their objectives while providing genuine value to their targets. The counterintelligence framework, the identification and neutralization of hidden enemies, requires more than passive observation. It demands the development of systematic counterintelligence capabilities that can penetrate their carefully constructed facades while protecting oneself from their manipulative strategies. This framework operates on the principle that the most effective defense against sophisticated manipulation is equally sophisticated detection and countermeasures. The foundation of any effective counterintelligence operation begins with what intelligence professionals call Baseline establishment. This involves creating detailed profiles of individuals in your network that document their stated motivations, claimed capabilities, behavioral patterns, and relationship dynamics over time. The objective is not to become paranoid or suspicious of everyone, but to develop the data necessary to identify inconsistencies and patterns that might indicate hidden agendas. Baseline establishment requires systematic documentation of specific, verifiable information, rather than general impressions or emotional responses. This includes tracking promises made and fulfilled, correlations between stated values and actual behaviors, consistency of stories told across different contexts, and the alignment between claimed expertise and demonstrated capabilities. The process begins with careful attention to how individuals present themselves during initial interactions. Hidden enemies often provide more information than necessary in early conversations, not because they're naturally forthcoming, but because they're establishing the foundation for their long-term deception. They may share impressive credentials, hint at valuable connections, or demonstrate knowledge that positions them as uniquely valuable partners or allies. Elena, a technology executive, learned to apply baseline establishment after a series of disappointing professional relationships. She began documenting key claims made by new professional contacts during their initial meetings. Educational backgrounds, previous positions, specific accomplishments, and areas of expertise. She would then systematically verify these claims through independent sources rather than accepting them at face value. This practice revealed significant discrepancies in the presentations of several individuals who had initially seemed like valuable additions to her professional network. One consultant had claimed extensive experience with companies that had no record of employing him. Another potential business partner had described successful exits from previous ventures that had actually ended in bankruptcy. A third individual had presented academic credentials from institutions that had no record of his attendance. The verification process wasn't conducted to expose these individuals publicly, but to establish accurate baselines for evaluating their ongoing behaviors and recommendations. Understanding someone's actual background and capabilities allows for much more accurate assessment of their motivations and the likely reliability of their advice or assistance. The second element of the counterintelligence framework involves pattern correlation analysis. This technique identifies relationships between different behaviors, events, and outcomes that might not be immediately apparent but reveal underlying strategic coordination. Hidden enemies often operate through seemingly unrelated actions that collectively advance their objectives while maintaining plausible deniability about their coordinated nature. Pattern correlation analysis requires maintaining detailed records of interactions, suggestions, introductions, and outcomes over extended periods. The goal is to identify statistical relationships between the advice or assistance provided by suspected individuals and the results experienced by those who follow their counsel. This analysis might reveal that a particular advisor's recommendations consistently benefit certain third parties while disadvantaging their supposed clients. It might show that someone's introductions systematically favor their own network while excluding potentially competitive alternatives. It might demonstrate that an individual's crisis interventions consistently result in increased dependency rather than enhanced independence. Robert, a successful entrepreneur, applied this methodology when he began to suspect that his business mentor, James, might not have his best interests at heart. Robert had been working with James for over 2 years and had initially been impressed with James's insights and connections. However, Robert began to feel that, despite James's assistance, his business growth had been slower than expected. Robert systematically reviewed all of James's recommendations and introductions over the previous 2 years. The analysis revealed troubling patterns. Potential partnerships that James had discouraged had been pursued by competitors and had yielded significant benefits. Clients that James had suggested Robert avoid had become highly profitable relationships for other companies in Robert's industry. Investment opportunities that James had deemed unsuitable had generated substantial returns for other entrepreneurs. The correlation analysis also revealed that James's recommended service providers consistently charged premium rates while delivering mediocre results. The strategic advisors James had introduced had provided expensive counsel that led to minimal business improvement. The potential investors James had recommended had offered significantly worse terms than market standards. Most significantly, Robert discovered that James had financial relationships with many of the service providers and advisors he recommended, receiving referral fees that had never been disclosed. James was not just providing poor advice, he was being compensated for steering Robert toward expensive, underperforming solutions while directing him away from genuine opportunities. The third element involves information flow analysis, which tracks how sensitive information moves through your network and identifies unusual patterns that might indicate intelligence gathering or strategic leak creation. Hidden enemies often use their trusted positions to gather information that they then use to advantage themselves or disadvantage their targets. Information flow analysis requires careful attention to what information you share with different people and how that information subsequently appears in different contexts. This might involve sharing different versions of sensitive information with different individuals to determine which sources are reliable and which might be compromising your confidentiality. The technique also involves monitoring how information you share appears to be used by others. If strategic information you share with a trusted advisor subsequently appears to benefit their other clients or associates, this might indicate that your confidences are being monetized rather than protected. This analysis extends to understanding the timing and context of information requests. Hidden enemies often have sophisticated understanding of when certain types of information become valuable and will time their intelligence gathering accordingly. They might probe for information about business strategies just before major industry conferences where that information could be valuable to competitors. They might seek personal information just before major life events where that intelligence could be used for manipulation or advantage. Catherine, a senior marketing executive, became suspicious when she noticed that confidential information she had shared with her deputy Marcus seemed to appear in competitor strategies with unusual frequency and speed. Catherine began conducting information flow experiments, sharing different strategic information with different people in her network, and monitoring how that information appeared in market activities. The experiments revealed that information shared exclusively with Marcus appeared in competitor campaigns within weeks, while information shared with other team members remained confidential. More sophisticated analysis revealed that Marcus was not simply leaking information to competitors, he was selectively sharing intelligence that would damage Catherine's initiatives while protecting information that might benefit the overall company. Marcus was engaged in what might be called surgical intelligence operations, designed to undermine Catherine's professional standing while maintaining his own position within the organization. He was sharing enough information to damage Catherine's competitive advantages while withholding enough to avoid detection through crude leak analysis. The fourth element of the counterintelligence framework involves motivation validation testing. This technique systematically tests whether individuals' stated motivations align with their actual behaviors when faced with situations that reveal their true priorities. Hidden enemies often present themselves as having altruistic or mutually beneficial motivations, but their actual behaviors under pressure reveal more selfish or competitive priorities. Motivation validation testing involves creating situations where individuals must choose between their stated values and their personal interests. These tests don't need to be elaborate or deceptive. They simply need to provide clear choices that reveal whether someone's actions match their proclaimed motivations. The testing might involve offering opportunities that would benefit the other person at no cost to yourself, to see whether they respond with appropriate gratitude or treat such opportunities as expected entitlements. It might involve observing how they behave when they believe their actions are unobserved or when they think there are no consequences for selfish behavior. The most revealing tests involve situations where the individual must choose between their stated commitment to your welfare and opportunities for their own advancement. A true ally will occasionally sacrifice their own interests for your benefit. A hidden enemy will consistently prioritize their own interests while maintaining the appearance of support. David tested his business partner Sarah when he became suspicious about her commitment to their shared venture. David created opportunities for Sarah to demonstrate whether her stated dedication to their partnership was genuine or merely convenient. He shared information about a lucrative consulting opportunity that would require significant time investment but would benefit only Sarah personally. He offered to introduce Sarah to potential investors for independent projects that would compete with their shared business. He suggested that Sarah might want to pursue certain professional opportunities even if they would reduce her availability for their partnership. The testing revealed that Sarah consistently prioritized opportunities for personal advancement over their shared business interests. When offered consulting work that would distract from their partnership, she accepted immediately without considering the impact on their shared projects. When introduced to investors for competing ventures, she pursued those relationships aggressively while reducing her engagement with their joint initiatives. When presented with networking opportunities that would benefit her personally but potentially conflict with their business relationship, she attended without hesitation. The motivation validation testing revealed that Sarah's commitment to their partnership was contingent on it serving her personal advancement goals. When better opportunities became available, she was prepared to abandon or undermine their shared venture without significant consideration of David's interests or their previous commitments. The fifth element involves strategic counterpositioning, which creates situations where hidden enemies reveal themselves by attempting to prevent or undermine actions that would expose their true nature. This technique operates on the principle that hidden enemies will react defensively to threats against their carefully constructed positions, often revealing themselves through their attempts to maintain their manipulative advantages. Strategic counterpositioning involves announcing intentions or beginning actions that would reduce hidden enemies' access to information, influence, or strategic positioning. Their reactions to these proposed changes often reveal more about their true motivations than months of careful observation. The technique might involve announcing plans to diversify your advisory network, suggesting that you might seek second opinions on important decisions, or indicating that you're considering changes that would reduce your dependence on particular relationships or arrangements. Hidden enemies will often react to such announcements with subtle pressure, emotional manipulation, or strategic countermoves designed to maintain their privileged positions. The most sophisticated applications of strategic counterpositioning involve creating apparent opportunities for hidden enemies to reveal their true nature by presenting them with chances to demonstrate loyalty that conflict with their actual objectives. These situations force them to choose between maintaining their cover and pursuing their real goals, often leading to actions that expose their true priorities. Jennifer applied this technique when she became suspicious of her longtime assistant, Carol, who seemed to have extraordinary insight into internal company dynamics and political relationships. Jennifer began announcing plans to restructure reporting relationships, implement new information security protocols, and rotate administrative responsibilities among different staff members. Carol's reactions to these proposed changes were revealing. She expressed strong concerns about the efficiency implications of information security changes that would limit her access to confidential communications. She argued against rotating administrative responsibilities, claiming that disrupting established relationships would damage productivity. She lobbied against reporting structure changes that would reduce her direct access to senior management discussions. Each of Carol's objections was framed in terms of company interests and operational efficiency, but the pattern revealed her primary concern was maintaining privileged access to information and relationships that served her personal objectives rather than company purposes. When Jennifer implemented modest versions of these changes as tests, Carol's performance remained excellent, but her engagement and enthusiasm decreased noticeably, suggesting that her motivation had been more about information access than work satisfaction. The counterintelligence framework requires systematic application over extended periods to be effective. Hidden enemies are sophisticated operators who adapt their strategies based on their assessment of their target's awareness and defenses. The framework must therefore be dynamic, incorporating new techniques and adjusting existing approaches based on evolving threats and changing relationship dynamics. The ultimate objective of the counterintelligence framework is not to eliminate all risk from human relationships, but to develop the capabilities necessary to identify genuine threats while preserving authentic connections. The sophisticated identification of hidden enemies requires sophisticated analysis, but it also requires the wisdom to distinguish between legitimate caution and destructive paranoia. The framework provides tools for making these distinctions systematically rather than relying on intuition or emotional reactions that can be manipulated by skilled operators. The mastery of these techniques transforms one's approach to relationships from naive trust to strategic awareness. This transformation is not about becoming cynical or manipulative oneself, but about developing the intellectual and emotional tools necessary to navigate a world where deception and authenticity coexist in complex and often indistinguishable forms. The framework provides the means to protect oneself from exploitation while maintaining the capacity for genuine connection and mutual benefit with those who deserve such trust. The application of these principles requires patience, discipline, and systematic thinking. The identification of hidden enemies is rarely dramatic or immediate. It emerges through careful analysis of patterns, inconsistencies, and correlations that reveal themselves only through sustained observation and systematic documentation. The framework provides the structure necessary to conduct this analysis effectively while maintaining one's own ethical standards and authentic relationships with genuine allies. In the end, the ability to identify and neutralize hidden enemies is not about becoming a more effective manipulator oneself, but about developing immunity to manipulation while preserving one's capacity for authentic human connection. The framework serves as both shield and lens, protecting against deception while providing clearer vision of the complex landscape where human relationships and strategic interests intersect. The most successful application of these principles involves understanding that the identification of hidden enemies is ultimately about protecting and enhancing genuine relationships rather than eliminating all risk from human interaction. The framework provides the tools necessary to distinguish between authentic allies and sophisticated deceivers, creating space for deeper trust with those who deserve it while maintaining appropriate defenses against those who would exploit such trust for their own advantage. This comprehensive approach to relationship analysis and strategic awareness represents a mature understanding of human nature that acknowledges both its potential for genuine connection and its capacity for sophisticated deception. The framework provides practical tools for navigating this complex reality while maintaining one's own integrity and authentic capacity for trust where it is warranted and wise.